p.m. Inform the public we are returning from an executive session with nothing to report out. Remind everybody that this is being recorded and broadcast live by the Raynham Channel, and I would ask everybody to join us in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I'll entertain a motion for the minutes, please.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
That is approved. Next up, we have an interview for the Assistant Animal Control position. Colleen Morse. Colleen, are you with us?
I am.
Come on up.
How are you?
Good, yourself?
Good.
Good. So, Colleen, if you want to take a few minutes to introduce yourself, tell us about your interest in the position, and then we might have a few questions for you.
Okay. So my name's Colleen Morse. I'm from Easton, Mass. And I currently work for another another town. And I am interested in Raynham for the fact that it's a community town, smaller. So that's, and I'm pretty close by, and reminds me of my town that I grew up in, so.
Great.
Yeah,
Mr. Shen?
so I'm sorry, I didn't hear as much as what you said, so maybe you could just speak a little louder.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, you do ACO work at another town?
Mm-hmm.
What is that town?
In Taunton.
Oh, in Taunton? So you're next door in Taunton?
Yeah.
And what did you say about Raynham? You live here or something?
No, I live in Easton, and it reminds me of Easton.
Oh, I see.
I'm actually originally from the North Shore.
Okay.
I'm from Wilmington.
Okay.
So it's just that small community vibe
How long have you worked in Taunton?
since April.
Since April?
Yep.
And give me a little idea what your duties are in that capacity.
Well, we do a lot of, I do, and the other two. Dog bites, strays. We do a lot of wildlife, picking up deceased. We do a lot of trap, neuter, spay and release for feral cats. Then they go to the shelter. They get their shots, their shots, and then they're adopted.
I see.
The adults get sent back to where they originally were, and
Wow, so you cover the whole gamut. When you say the other two, who are the other two?
my boss, Manny, and then there's another assistant also.
Is your boss a full-time person?
Yes,
And the other person, is that person full-time or part-time?
part-time.
So it's one full-time and two
Yeah.
part-time? I see. So if you were working here in Raynham, what would your hour schedule be? Because you'd be working with Linda. And so how was that being?
So I'm not sure on what Linda has for the days that she was doing. When I had spoken to her before, it was going to be 1 week on, 1 week off, and alternate weekends. I think that's what she had in mind. I'm not sure what.
So when you say 1 week on, you mean 24 hour?
Yeah.
So 24 hours for that week, at 24 hours a day?
So I'm on call too in Taunton. So I start on a Friday at 4 and I end Monday at 4.
So a 24-hour day schedule would be okay with you?
Mm-hmm. I do it now.
The only other question I have, Mr. Chairman, is what would, in as much as we would have two part-time people in one vehicle, and some of these calls, like as you mentioned, a situation where you need to respond relatively quickly, has there been some commitment to where the one vehicle is going to be so that you had access to it from Taunton?
So it's usually just me on. So if I'm on my weekend, it's every other weekend. So I'm on Friday to Monday. I take the van home and I
Okay.
leave my car at the shelter.
Okay, that sounds fine. Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Riley?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Colleen, you explained about your work with the Taunton Animal Control, but looking at your resume, you've had some animal-related experience prior
have.
to that. Could you explain to us about
I
that?
have,
please?
well, I grew up, like I said, in Wilmington. We owned a horse boarding facility, so I've been around horses, farm animals since before I was born. I own horses now. I have a barn at my house. I have a couple of goats.
Oh.
I have 3 pit bulls and a cat. And I worked at PetSense, where I was lucky enough to be able to do my dog obedience training there. got to take some great classes in pet nutrition. So I've always been around animals my whole entire life. I have rescued 5 horses in the past 8 years, 9 years, around there. So I had to give up.
Do you have any particular career goals that are in this area, or is this a field that you want to specialize in
Yes.
going forward?
Yep. I've always had a fascination of like the animal control, just like being able to help out and contribute. And I'm actually enrolled in the academy. I enrolled myself in, and I started in September. I started September 1st. I'll finish October 13th. And then actually next Monday and Tuesday I'll be taking my core competency for that. So.
Now, you live in Easton.
I do.
Would there be any issue you getting to any places in Raynham when you're on duty, if you were on duty?
No. Mm-mm. I live about 12 minutes.
Okay.
That's what it took me.
Okay, very good. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
you.
Thank you. Thank you, Colleen.
Colleen, just, excuse me, one question for you. Do you, well, let me rephrase, how do you see navigating the balance between your priorities in Taunton and the priorities you'd have in Raynham, specifically around the weekend coverage that you have with Taunton?
So I'm not every weekend
Okay.
in Taunton. I'm every other. So whatever, I'm sure that, I mean, if it became an issue, I would have to choose, obviously.
Sure.
I wouldn't,
Yeah.
and I would let him know, and I would not leave him high and dry. I would give him ample time to find somebody.
Sure. Okay.
But if it worked around the schedule, then that's great. If it doesn't, then
Okay. Perfect.
One last thing,
Sure.
Mr. Chairman. Just to be clear, you're doing part-time work in Taunton, and that's, so that part-time and this part-time would be the totality of your work and engagement? In other words, it's not part-time, you have some other job.
I don't have another job.
Okay, so it's part-time equals 2 halves equals a whole.
Yeah, and if you needed me for more hours, that's fine too.
Okay, good. Thank you, Mr.
Good.
Chairman.
Colleen, any questions for us?
I don't right now. I probably will get in my car and have 15 million questions for you. So,
Always the way.
yeah, I know. And I was thinking, I'm like, what can I ask? But
That's all right. We appreciate your time.
thank you.
Thank you, Colleen.
Does the
Thanks,
board
David.
want to take action tonight or take it under advisement?
I'll take action. I'll make a motion to bring her on board.
I will second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
That is approved. Congratulations, Colleen.
much. I
All right.
it. Thank you.
And you didn't
Thanks.
even have to ask a question.
I might later on when I get in the car.
Thanks. I don't see our ACO Linda with us this evening, so I'll go back if she comes in. No appointments this evening, no public hearings. Old business, the Plan Aid collection bins. Excuse me, I spoke to Deb today, and she was able to track down the answers that we had. The town had never collected the funds. Apparently, they had been going to the Lions Club, which is why we had no receipt of it. And they were removed because people were dumping furniture there, and it was requiring the town to pick it up. And so she wasn't able, according to Deb, to give a plan as to how they thought they'd navigate preventing furniture from coming again. So that's one piece I think is still outstanding, but at least we know somewhere in town the funds were coming. So I'll open it up to the board as to how you want to proceed.
Well, I mean, I started last time. You go ahead, Pat.
Yeah, well, concern that I have too is that reading it over, I mean, Planet Aid is certainly a reputable nonprofit organization, but it does ask for exclusive rights at the location for a collection of clothing and shoes. And since that is a town property, if there were a local group that wanted to have, whether it's a Lions Club or another group in town that wanted, whether it's to send things to Afghanistan or wherever, wanted to have such a drive, they wouldn't be able to do it at that location. So that would be a concern that I would have.
Okay.
Well, it sounds like on the one hand, they do, Planet Aid, is very respected and it does reputable work, and yet we have those people that are attending the event that are causing problems. So is it for this reason that we're going to not approve Planet Aid's next program, or can we do something to control the behavior that is not acceptable?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the question is, what do we do? Because absent having it policed or putting in at the taxpayer's expense, perhaps surveillance cameras, there's really no way for us 24/7 to monitor it. And there's some communities that have completely outlawed these bins for that very reason. So
I think if I could, Mr. Chairman, too, they do have locations on business properties.
Yes, correct.
So they do have that option. As I said, where this is town property
Yeah.
would be my concern.
Sure. Well, the only other possibility, and I'm not recommending, but I mean, if they were told in order for them to hold the event, they had to provide the assurance and whatever that is, the coverage, if that were, I don't know that cost would offset what benefit they got. But I would say, look, if you want to be here, you have to control this and you're responsible for it. And if you can't control it and be responsible, then you can't hold the event. That would be my opinion.
Okay. Is that a motion?
Yes.
I'll second that, but is this a one-time event, or is it just they want to put their
No.
bins there and keep them?
My understanding is put them there and keep them as they had
Right.
previously done.
Right.
So do we want to do a caveat about striking the exclusivity from the agreement as well?
Yes.
Yes.
And I'll accept that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I have a motion to approve with an amendment that there's no exclusivity and it's on the condition that they can develop and enforce a plan to ensure there's no illegal dumping.
Fine.
Sounds good to me.
All right,
So
and that's a second?
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
That's approved, thank you. New business. Discussion and action, designation of American Rescue Plan Act lead. I asked for this to be on the agenda. We haven't made any determinations yet as to how we plan on spending the funds, and I would continue to advise that we don't do that at this time because Treasury continues to put out guidance. But I do think it's appropriate at this point to have a point person within town coordinating that. And my recommendation would be it's our finance director, Chris Lavalette. 90% of it's finance and accounting, and so I think it's a natural place for our finance director to lead this, and so I would make that as a request to the board.
I make that motion.
Second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
That is approved.
Although he's got to wear a tie.
Next,
Congratulations, Chris.
Thank you.
One more job.
next up, former Selectman Jim Dupont is here. Selectman Dupont reached out to me last week, and he asked to do a brief presentation on congressional redistrict, and I emphasize brief because I gave him my opinion that I felt like this was getting into political waters, which is something we typically don't delve into. But out of respect for Mr. Dupont, I wanted to make sure he had an opportunity to present to us. Jim?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to very briefly, for the record, say any guy wearing a purple shirt is okay by me.
Thank you.
I'll explain later. And just to make sure the record is clear, the chairman didn't say that I wanted to make a brief presentation. He said I would. And John Donahue said he was available if you need to curtail that, Joe.
Thank you, Jim.
Yeah, and I'll be brief and to the point. All right, this is something I wanted to address the board because this is something that comes up every 10 years, and without going through 200 years of congressional history, essentially, Raynham has been in a district that was essentially the 4th district since about the 1800s, and for many years, that district was represented by Joe Martin, a former selectman from North Attleboro. He was the last Republican Speaker of the House until Newt Gingrich. He was replaced by Margaret Heckler. Margaret Heckler was replaced by Barney Frank from Newton. And then, in the 1990 census, Raynham suddenly found itself, the gentleman whose picture's over there on the wall, I remember sitting in his living room and having Don McKinnon say to me, Raynham and South Boston? He was apoplectic. And as you know, Don and I are sort of in different parties, but it was about Raynham to Don. I think if we would agree on one thing, Don McKinnon cared about his family first and this town second, in that order. And it was a close second. It was about Raynham. It wasn't about parties. It wasn't about politics. It was about the town. And when we were put into a district that he just found so foreign to himself, he was apoplectic. Subsequent to that, the congressional district ultimately was succeeded to Stephen Lynch when Joe Moakley passed away. And then in the next census, they did something that had never been done. Helen Lounsbury told me that they couldn't get the districts to come out right. And when they say right, there's a median number that they can only be so far above or so far below. And because Raynham kept coming out wrong using the precincts, they told Helen Lounsbury, you're going to use the census tracts. You're not even going to use precincts. And then in the following census in 2000, the town clerk realigned the precincts that made it so that North Raynham went into one congressional district and the rest of Raynham went into another. Now, there's a group called the South Coast Coalition on Redistricting that has an alternative plan on the table that would put Raynham into, as a whole, into the old district with Taunton and the current, which is essentially the 4th district presently. And there are two things that you'll hear if you call anybody involved in the redistricting process. First thing they'll say is, what would your change do to the other districts? And then so, oh, you can't do that because that does this, and the ripple effect. And that's a fair thing to say. Well, this group, headed by a man named Dax Crocker, has done an alternative plan that works for all of the towns and cities that are affected by it. Now, Joe, you and I have talked about this briefly, and this involves, the seminal part of it is to put Fall River back into one district. Now, they have their own reasons for that, but they're the same reasons of why Raynham essentially would arguably want to have one district as its member in Congress. And very quickly, and then believe it or not, Joe, I'm almost done. I only came with 3 pages, very short 45-minute speech. 5 minutes. The proposal they would do would move the entire city of Fall River into the 9th district. They would move Middleborough from the 9th into the 4th, which it had previously been in. It would move the entirety of Raynham, which is now split between the 4th and the 8th, into the 4th, and move Walpole as a whole into the 4th. Now, without going through all of the numbers, essentially it says, if these new boundaries are adopted, Congressional District 4, which is currently underpopulated, in other words, the districts as they stand now have to change. Have to. You can't say, well, let's leave them as it is. You cannot do that. The census figures, the preliminary ones, say you can't. So you have to change them. If you're going to change them, why not change them for the benefit of Raynham? Selfishly. The chairman would understand. We sort of see that thing the same way, Joe. But Congressional District is currently underpopulated, and this change would make it 394 over, which statistically is within the federal guidelines. Congressional District 9 is currently underpopulated. That's the Cape and Islands District, by about 19,892 people. It would be 1,500 over, again, within the federal guidelines. And this essentially, and it would have the political effect of putting Fall River into one district. Now, I wanted to address the board on this because this came about when I was, during my time as a selectman. It's come about before, and each time it came around, there were 2 things said by the people in Boston doing the redistricting. The one thing they say is, what would your proposed change do? Remember I said there were 2 things? The other thing they say is, well, why didn't anybody say anything? And yes, I'm looking at the 3 of you. They said, we didn't hear from anybody. We didn't hear from the selectmen. We didn't hear from citizens. We didn't hear from the state representatives or the state senator involved. Now, typically, and I understand it because I've been on that side of the table, this is something that falls way outside any municipal responsibility of this board. Way outside it. But I got to thinking about it, Joe, and the reason I wanted to address the board was essentially, with all due respect, out of Don McKinnon's respect for and reverence for Raynham as a town, one town. And what made me decide to do it was when I was talking with the people involved in the new public safety facility, went to a couple of meetings. one of the things that came up as sort of a peripheral issue to it is that part of their discussions, and in terms of master plan review, that there's always been a problem with Raynham's identity, that we don't have a town center. And that this new public safety facility with the athletic fields and the Lions Club will help Raynham establish an identity and a focus. All right? And ultimately, perhaps more will occur in that regard in and around that location. But the point is, this is the time I said this change of putting Raynham back into, first of all, one district, but second of all, into the district essentially it had been in for 100 years. But this is the time to do that. And the Constitution says, the related state law says, you're not supposed to split towns. Whenever you can avoid doing that, you should do that. And I think that this is the last thing I'll say, Joe, because I see you looking at your watch already. Shivo's got his hand up, so. This isn't something I think the board necessarily needs to take a vote on. I don't think this is necessarily anything that any official action on the part of the selectmen is necessary. Whether it's appropriate or not isn't for me to say. But I thought it was appropriate for me to say it to the board, to speak through you to the town, and just say, because everybody, these are the sort of things, this is ultimate, Joe, you and I are kind of political junkies, inside baseball guys, right? This is inside baseball. This is that ultimate average person who walks around saying, gee, I wonder if Precinct 2 is going to end up in maybe Jim DuPont does, and Joe. But at the end of the day, this would put Raynham someplace that it had been politically, and I think benefited from that. This isn't anything to take away from or in any way a criticism of our current member of Congress, mine, in North Raynham, or the gentleman who represents the rest of the town. But it is something that says something about the town, that we've kind of been used by people for political purposes. I understand, real world, they got to do what they got to do. There's reality in that. I understand. At the end of the day, I also understand this town, and I understand myself. And I wanted to say those words to you and just thank you for your time. I didn't know if you had any questions. I sent you a copy of their draft letter. It's too long to read here, Joe. But the material point, though, whenever you raise this up, and then I'll finish, people involved in redistricting will say, well, gee, we'd like this. They say, oh, but that would do this and the ripple, and okay. Dax Crocker and his group did the math. The people who are drawing the new maps, the reapportionment of the districts in Massachusetts, have done the math too. And what the math says is one thing. You can do the districts however you want as long as the math comes out. And if this is a chance for Raynham to get into one district where it had been, but you know, this doesn't say that this is not about Fall River's issues. This is not about Middleborough's issues, or Walpole, the other communities that are affected. This is about us. And just so you'll know, I'm not running for Congress or for selectmen. The people that are at that side of the table, I think you people are doing a fine job, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. DuPont. Any questions, Mr. Shiva? Ms. Riley?
No, thank you.
Well, I think we will definitely take it under advisement. Appreciate your presentation, and I did have a chance in between work and here to skim the email you sent, but I'll read the rest of it, and I'm sure we'll catch up over it in more depth, Jim.
Yeah, and thank you, Joe. And could you please note the time that...
You were very impressive. Very eloquent this evening.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Patty.
All right. Any other new business, Mr. Shiva?
Just one thing, Mr. Chair, and that is that last week I brought up a motion to put together a committee to review employee turnover, and in the meantime, there's been some question about whether or not that conflicts with the open meeting law, and just for the record, I would like that subject to be on the agenda for next week, We have legal counsel checking into whether or not that will work in compliance with the open meeting law. So I would like to see that on the agenda, Chris, if we could be sure that that's on the agenda. That's all I have,
Thank you,
Mr.
Ms.
Chair.
Riley. Any other
No,
business?
thank you.
Okay. Chris, do you have any report for Graham?
No, sorry,
Okay.
Graham, yeah, yeah,
No, that's fine.
Okay.
No problem. Thank you. Selectmen's report, Mr. Shivo.
None?
Ms. Riley.
Just that it was a busy weekend in Raynham, and you were at all the events as well, Mr. Pacheco, but I know the fishing derby was a great success, and kudos to our Raynham firefighters for that. I did go to, as you did, to Andy's Aesthetics, a new business in town, and I will say, though, Mr. Shavo, take note of this, that when I'm at an event with Mr. Pacheco, I do feel like a second-class citizen. Of course, no one knew me at Andy's Aesthetics, which I would, is reasonable. But they made Mr. Pacheco honorary senator for the town of Raynham.
Oh, wow.
And then at Sunday's event, the announcer says, "And Selectman Joseph Pacheco is in attendance." Hello. Only kidding. Only kidding. It was a great event. And Sundays especially, 50 years for the Raynham Giants. Great Mr. David Yell and Michael Fitzsimmons actually started the league 50 years ago. They were there to be honored. It was a great turnout. They invited anybody who had been involved in Raynham Giants over the years. So I'll let you take it from there, Mr. Pacheco. But
Thank you.
great events.
No, I absolutely wish Andy's Aesthetics well, South Street West, another new business in town. We're grateful for that. As you said, 50 years for Raynham Giants football. And that was actually the first time I'd ever heard the story of how the organization was founded, so found it really interesting. And also, outside of Raynham on Saturday night, I was able to go to the 100th anniversary of the David F. Adams VFW post in Taunton. And I would think, and I think a lot of people think, a lot of VFW posts are 100 plus years old, but apparently there are quite few, not just in Massachusetts, but nationwide, at 100 years or older. And so it was a great opportunity to get out to one of our sister communities and celebrate the VFW for their perseverance and their continued work representing all of our veterans of foreign war. So definitely a busy weekend.
Sure. Could we just perhaps have a resolution honoring the Raynham Giants on
Yes.
their 50th anniversary?
Absolutely.
Sure, second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, that's
And while
approved.
we're talking about resolutions, Mr. Chair, if I may, I would like again to put on the agenda second week now for a proclamation recognizing Sergeant Kahns and firefighter Alexander for the phenomenal work they did with the multi-$100,000 grant. So could we put that once again on the agenda for next week? I asked for it 2 weeks ago. I'd like it to be there.
Yeah, I think we're backed up on proclamations because we also voted to do one for Harish at Raynham Youth Soccer, and that's in Q2. So Deb's going to have a lot of printing to do.
Okay.
All right.
So many great events going on in town.
Absolutely. No correspondence this evening, no members of the press with us. Any emergency business, Mr. Shiva?
None.
Ms. Riley?
I have none.
Citizen and community input? No. All right. Performance of administrative duties, approval of the town of Raynham invoice and payroll warrants.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
That is approved. And approval of the Raynham police invoice and payroll warrants.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, and I'll do a roll call, Mr. Shivo?
Aye.
Ms. Riley?
Aye.
And I will abstain. That passes. If there is no other business, I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second, even with Mr. Dupont's presentation. Look at that.
Yeah, absolutely. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.